All right. Hello, everyone. And thank you all for coming today to our webinar. I'm Carol Hussey, the founder of HHS Connect. And today we're going to be talking about TEFCA and CMS aligned networks, the next phase of payer and provider use cases for healthcare data exchange. We called this webinar from fragmented to flowing, and I think you can all guess why we did that. But we really want to talk about practical applications for this today and how you can move forward with real interoperability. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping tips that we have here. We are going to be recording the session. It is being recorded. After the session, we'll be sending out slides to all of the registrants from the webinar. We do encourage you to participate. Ellie will be monitoring the chat today, and so feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your organization, where you're from, and we'll be monitoring for questions along the way. We will also have time at the end for questions as well. So we'll do our best to get to all of the questions throughout the webinar, but if we need to, we'll certainly follow up. And finally, if you have any kind of audio issues or connection issues, sometimes the simplest fix is usually just to leave the session and rejoin. That tends to solve a lot of the problems. So before we get started today, I just wanted to ground us a little bit on why this topic matters so much right now. For many years in health and human services, we've talked about interoperability. I think I just made a post about this on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago. And with it, it's really been more from a technical goal, right? We talk about interfaces and data standards and health information exchanges, APIs, things like that. But increasingly, interoperability is not just a technical issue. It is a care issue. And it's an operational issue and a quality issue, and in many ways, an equity issue. So when information is not moving, people carry the burden. So the patients who have to repeat their history over and over again. Families are handed over a clipboard and they have to constantly fill out forms with a lot of the same repetitive information. Providers making decisions without knowing what happened in other settings. And health plans may have claims data, but not the clinical context behind those claims. Public sector leaders are often trying to support whole person care with fragmented views of the people they serve. This fragmentation has real consequences. It affects care transitions, it affects quality measurement, it affects authorizations, and it affects care management. And for those of us working in and around health and human services, this is especially important. Health and human services populations are often interacting with multiple systems at the same time: Medicaid, behavioral health, child welfare, disability services. And if we're serious about person-centered, coordinated care and outcomes-driven systems, then the ability to access and use trusted health information is foundational. And that is why TEFCA exists and is so important. So in case you're unfamiliar with it, it is the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement. It's not magic. It does not instantly solve every data quality, consent, governance, workflow issue that's out there, but it does represent a major shift toward a more consistent national framework for health information exchange. And so today we're going to move beyond the acronym and we'll talk about what TEFCA actually enables, what data may be available, what is not guaranteed, how organizations can connect, and how this data can be used in real provider, payer, and care management workflows. We'll also talk about some of the practical constraints because making interoperability real is not just about getting access to data. It's about using that data responsibly and securely in ways that improve decisions and outcomes. So I'm thrilled today to have an incredible panel with us. So one of the folks here I've worked with and known for many, many years. So I always enjoy when I get to work with Ashley. We have Ashley Cairns here she's the CEO of Keywell.ai. And she has over 17 years of experience leading healthcare analytics and AI initiatives across payer and provider markets. Before founding Keywell, she held leadership positions at Optum and Advisory Board, where she led research and development efforts for enterprise data products supporting value-based care and quality initiatives. Earlier in her career, where I met her, we worked together at Public Consulting Group, where she led Medicaid payment reform, ACA implementation, and program integrity initiatives. So Ashley and the Keywell team are focused on helping healthcare organizations deploy grounded AI scaffolding to automate complex workflows such as prior authorization, appeals management, and chart extraction, all within your own environment, which we know is very important to you. We're also joined by Andrew Kerr, the CEO of FortyAU. And Andrew is a technology executive and business owner with more than 20 years of experience leading teams, delivering software solutions, and helping organizations grow and thrive. At FortyAU, he leads an agile team of software developers delivering custom software, data, and AI solutions for clients in healthcare, finance, and other regulatory industries. Also from FortyAU, we have Josh Jensen, and Josh has more than a decade of experience leading technical teams and delivering enterprise scale applications. He brings deep expertise in cloud architecture, multiple cloud strategies, hybrid infrastructure, and applications for highly regulated industries, including HIPAA compliance, telehealth, patient monitoring, and scheduling systems. So together, Ashley, Andrew, and Josh bring the right mix of healthcare strategy, data, AI, and engineering experience to help all of us understand what TEFCA can actually mean in practice. So with that, I'm going to turn the baton over to Ashley, who will begin our presentation and help us level set on TEFCA. Oh,
Great. Thank you,
actually,
Carol.
I skipped the learning objectives. Apologies for
Go
that. So yeah, I'll jump
ahead.
in here real
Yeah, go
quick.
ahead.
So yes, we talked a little bit about some of this in the introduction, but we are going to talk to you specifically about TEFCA-enabled data feeds. We're going to discuss enforcement and voluntary initiatives. We call it killing the clipboard, which we're all for. And then data that's available now that you can use. And then how do you go about connecting? I mentioned that in my intro. What do you do with that data when you get it? And then we're going to do a demo. So you'll get to actually see how we step through an actual FHIR transaction and extraction of data. So now, Ashley, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Carol, and the HHS Connect team. It's really great to be with you all today and talk about a topic that QL is excited about, as I'm sure many of you are as well. Our place in the ecosystem is a partner integrator, so helping leverage this data for actionable purposes. And so that's what my lens is on it for context. So first, what are TEFCA-enabled data feeds? Carol defined TEFCA, Trusted Exchange Framework for Common Agreement. It's kind of a mouthful. It's gone through a dozen policy and regulatory iterations. We won't go into all of that because it's not as exciting to talk about, but it's originally rooted in the 21st Century CARES Act, and that was 10 years ago. So it's really taken us that long to flesh out all the details about how this is going to work and to get everyone to agree to it across the nation. So where we are now, it's kind of a natural progression of working out all of these details and governance structures. And this current administration has taken a strong focus on interoperability and information blocking enforcement. So the Kill the Clipboard initiative and so forth has kind of given some incentive to larger organizations and has helped reinforce and to activate some of the major stakeholders, the health systems and payers to figure it out. So kind of just to get an understanding, we won't go too deep into this, but of like what TEFCA is, it's much more of a network, a grid system than it is an individual technology. So the TEFCA layers, so ONC, now ONC ASTP sets the policy, right? Kind of the regulations and policy layer. And then they appoint Sequoia Project as the recognized coordinating entity. And Sequoia Project is appointed to make the rules and standard operating procedures for how data is exchanged. So it's a really great resource to the Sequoia website on a lot of the details of TEFCA. The actual data sharing nodes on the grid are called QHINs or Qualified Health Information Networks, which are organizations that are selected as on-ramps. They route queries for patient data across different nodes. There are currently 11, Commonwealth Health Alliance, eClinicalWorks, Big Nexus, Health Gorilla, so you may have heard of some of these. And the exchange purposes then are the reasons that payers and providers can access data. So the Sequoia project helps to define what those exchange purposes are. There are things like treatment, payment, healthcare operations, and so forth. So we'll come back to that, but those are just some important concepts um, in the architecture behind TEFCA and the kind of network that makes it work. So you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay. So what are TEFCA feeds and what is in the data? There's a list of data that essentially you have to exchange if you're a TEFCA participant. And that includes the items that you see in the green box. So basically the meaningful parts of the patient record, diagnoses, problem list, meds, allergies, observations, lab results, patient information, and so forth. The list of required fields is set by US CDI, and we're on version 3 of that list. And that expands on previously required data sets to add some additional required status IDs and patient information, and plan information. So the takeaway here is that the data is getting richer than it used to be, and the requirements for exchanging data. Historically, one problem is that there may be data on the exchange, but if it's incomplete or the data that's required doesn't really include the full patient record, doesn't include the picture that you might need depending on the use case. What you might not get with TEFCA definitely could be missing historical data, like 2 to 3 years back, administrative and coverage data. There's really not any payment information. Any kind of aggregated quality information may not be there. And in general, just normalized clean data. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But one example from our work, we've worked with organizations that were incorporating TEFCA data into value-based care initiatives. They're under value-based care contracts, and their goal is to enrich patient profiles to give care teams the more complete context. And eventually, they wanted to incorporate that into point of care, but also use this data in predictive models to help them stratify patient risk. And the clinical data was helpful. The care teams could see more context about the overall patient health, information that might not have been visible in their own system with claims data alone or their own data from within their specialty network. But the use case for the predictive models was a little bit more challenging because the data only went back, to like from 6 months to a year at the time. So they didn't have this kind of like 2 to 3 year historical look back. So kind of depends on the use case and what you're trying to get out of the data that might be applicable or not. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so once you decide that TEFCA data could be valuable, what the next question is, how do we actually connect and are we allowed to connect? So there are rules about who can connect and for what reason. But at a very high level, it's healthcare providers, health plans, covered entities, federal, state, and local tribal governments, and public health authorities, and then delegates of those groups. So then how do you connect? Every organization at a high level has to connect through a qualified health information network, one of the QHINs. But there are different ways to get there. You can directly connect and become a TEFCA participant, or you can use a vendor-mediated connection. The direct connection path is more common for larger organizations, so payers, health systems, organizations with mature teams that can manage. There's a lot of legal and technical and identity and audit and compliance requirements that go into that. So you're taking on a lot of infrastructure and governance. Certainly it's possible, but the path that a lot of organizations, probably many on this call would take would be the more practical path is vendor mediated or intermediary mediated access. And so that means working through an HIE, a platform, a data aggregator, or a vendor already connected into the TEFCA ecosystem so that you can focus on integrating the workflows you actually care about, the care management, quality, risk, utilization type stuff that we'll talk about a little bit, or the analytics, instead of all the overhead to get connected to the data. So if you want to go to the next slide, um, so this slide is sourced from eLeon, which is it's a directory of all kinds of health tech solutions. You can go there and see this page under clinical data access, and you can learn more about these groups. But these are the intermediaries that you would typically work with to access data. If you qualify for one of the qualified exchange purposes for doing so. You'll notice that some of them are also QHINs. So it gets a little confusing. They're actually a node on the grid, but they also offer this kind of intermediary connection service and value add solutions on top of that. So like, the Nexus, Health Gorilla, et cetera. And so what do they actually what do they provide? They basically give you a connection path. You can get data through APIs. You can get data through flat files or direct data exchanges with them. Um, and they just kind of ease the process. They add the layer for identity verification, managing the exchange purposes and routing the queries to the right places. And then many of them also add kind of helpful downstream steps like data ingestion, deduplication, and some of them offer more like data normalization and cleaned up data. So that's one of the challenges with this data as you're getting it, and I think you'll see a little bit later with Andrew and Josh's presentation that sometimes there's a lot of data and it may be in different formats and you have to kind of normalize it. So a lot of them would add like cleaning and data format translation and standardization so that the data becomes more useful than maybe the raw data coming off. Um, so we haven't worked with all of these companies by any means. I've worked with a couple of them. So I can't give you specific recommendations, but you'll kind of find that they tend to have an area of focus. Like some work more with ACOs, while others work more with health tech startups. So just kind of a matter of researching and knowing the landscape a little bit, and then having conversations with the ones that are, on your kind of target. There are some that offer APIs that you can actually get, before you even connect or sort of get signed up on the as an exchange purpose. So you can test with an API and try to build things with synthetic patient data. So just to kind of like pilot or prototype something, some of them will offer that. Okay, you go to the next slide, please. All right, so assuming you get all of the data in place, what are some of the real world use cases that TEFCA can enable or can give some lift to? I think this one's pretty obvious, but patient care, and this is what Carol is talking about. When you go into a specialist office or emergency room and uh, you're having to fill out clipboard forms or they ask you, medical history a million times. I'm sure that many of us have had that experience where you're constantly trying to get stuff moved over or get your records or you get an x-ray somewhere and you can't bring it over and that's just frustrating and frankly harmful to patients and can delay care and so many reasons that this has been the real impetus for TEFCA and patient data exchange. So some other provider use cases would be things like transitions of care and referrals. So sending discharge information or handing off patient records to ensure continuity, closing the loop on referrals. And then quality and risk, especially important in value-based care. And the client we were working with, this is the reason that they were interested in the data. They wanted to be able to ensure that care gaps are closed, even if it's outside the specific episode of care or maybe even treatment area. Um, so, okay, we can go to the next slide. So that's for providers. And then for health plans, payers are participating largely in HIFCA for the purpose of healthcare operations and payment. So we talked about the exchange purposes. So those are the purposes that you're allowed to get on the exchange and exchange patient data. And the purposes for healthcare operations include things like care coordination, case management, so care management, longitudinal member record assembly, HEDIS reporting, HEDIS audit, quality gap identification and closure, quality assessment and improvement, so managing quality programs, clinical guideline development, outcomes evaluation, population health, like chronic disease registries, population health analytics, member outreach and intervention. And then performance review, so monitoring provider performance, health plan overall performance, and enrollment in care management program to close quality gaps. So they have to fit under the exchange purposes, and there's, obviously some legal review and validation that would be recommended here to make sure that any access to the data is appropriate and falls within the purview of what TEFCA allows. And one note I forgot to mention earlier, one requirement of TEFCA is that if you get data from the exchange, you have to also return the data that meets, the standards of USCS, UCSDI, the list of quality or of clinical data fields that you're required to return. So that makes sure that you can't just take the data and use it. You actually also have to contribute to the exchange. Next slide, please. Okay. So some things that I mentioned earlier, if you start to use data, you're going to have to navigate some of these, potential data challenges and operational challenges. So things like patient matching. There's the identity cross service when you connect to the QHINs. They operate that, ensuring that the data you're asking for is getting, you're getting the right data back. But then within your own environment, trying to match records and assemble a longitudinal record can be a challenge. Data completeness and normalization, if you're in this healthcare data world, you sort of know like there's this problem we have where one lab value doesn't mean the same thing as another lab value. They might have different reference ranges, and you don't always get that context back with it. So there's this kind of challenging normalization problem where one number might not mean the same thing. And so TEPCA doesn't really solve that on its own. Some of these other, like I mentioned, the other intermediaries sometimes can help solve that, but that's something that has to be considered. Consent, data use, and auditability. So if you're accessing this data, it's important to make sure that you're doing it within the exchange purposes, obviously, but then also making sure you have that audit trail and all of the kind of consent management and policy framework to make sure that you're complying with those requirements. And then, workflow adoption, kind of in general, that it's really anything we are trying to improve outcomes or make changes with data, right? It's just one piece of the puzzle is really getting the data. The next is kind of how you build it in and how you use it and layer AI output on top of it, making sure that it reaches the right person at the right time. And then I think obvious to everyone in this industry, but security, privacy, and governance. Right now, if you're getting data off the exchange, that really just opens up another sort of risk avenue, more data, more risk. So ensuring that it falls within your existing data protection and privacy, security, and governance frameworks is of course important for TEFCA as well. So I'll pause there. I think that the next piece is actually taking a look at some real data that Andrew and team are going to show. Do we want to pause there for questions or wait to the end, Carol?
Can pause here. If anyone has any questions, you want to come off mute since we have a manageable crowd today.
I'll actually go. I'll have a question for Ashley. How about that?
Love
I
that.
hope it's a softball, Andrew.
There you go. So I guess just Ashley, you've really monitored this space and obviously have the historical view of it, right? So what is your perspective on how TEFCA adoption is going and again, sort of the absorption within the community? Are people responding to this and using this? Because we've all seen, I think, if we've been around healthcare a while, sort of the slow processes and the adoption, and like you said, sort of the policy pieces that don't catch up. But what's your sense of like how the TEFCA rollout is going and how it's being utilized, just either anecdotally or just kind of within the broader community? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So especially this year, we've seen a lot more traction and interest around it. And that's, I think, in large part, this administration, this Kill the Clipboard initiative, what they've kind of done is gotten some of the big players together and voluntarily had them say, yeah, we're gonna meaningfully stand this up. And they set these documents, they call them kind of like MVP scopes, and they're saying, show us, prove it, you have to do these 10 things and you can demo and on our platform and show everyone that you can do it. And the other side of that is enforcement. So the information blocking enforcement is really starting to happen, and they know it's coming because they're paying attention. So before it was like, oh, there might be an API, but there would be a kind of a firewall or portal or something you'd have to get through, and that's not compliant with what they're looking for. So they're really starting to tear down some of those walls. But I would say it's not fully there yet, but I would say the momentum is increasing more than definitely historically, and I'm optimistic that it's going to actually be useful for these use cases.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and that's and that was always my I'll do a brief introduction here. Just Carol covered it kind of at the beginning, but I'm the CEO here at FortyAU. We're based in Nashville, Tennessee. I came from the provider side of the house, having worked with HCA Healthcare for about 10 years, and so that was kind of my initial introduction to some of these concepts and data sharing and those kind of things. And certainly, in my role at FortyAU. Gosh, we fight it out in the interoperable world, or the lack of interoperability in healthcare, all the time, right? So we started, FortyAU started doing a lot of EMR data integration work and trying to move data for customers and build data pipelines. And so we very much live in that world still today, and live with sort of the fragmentation that we've all been talking about, right? So this is a space that we're not unfamiliar with, and again have seen, to Ashley's point, it mature. But we, honestly, my journey towards understanding more about TEFCA really started about a year ago when I went up to Epic and I went to their open partner day. And Epic, if you've been in this industry a while, isn't really known for their openness and their willingness to share data and participate in things like this. And when I went to their open partner day, they spent a good 45 minutes to an hour walking through what they're doing around TEFCA, how they're responding. I think maybe, Ashley, to your point, some of the rules are starting to have teeth. And so Epic, I think, certainly wants to be on the good side of the government and all those kind of things. So that was interesting for me to see, just that they seem to be pretty engaged in this. And I at that point said, well, maybe I need to learn more about it, right? At FortyAU, we work with a few hundred clients, right? And so I always feel like if there's an advantage to what we do, because we work with early stage companies on up to very mature Fortune 100 companies, we get to see a fair amount of the market. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll hear about TEFCA and some of the uses from some of our customers when I was at Epic last summer. And sure enough, about 3 months later, a customer walks in the door, and Josh is going to show you a little bit of what we built for them today. And but they're in this case a very early stage kind of pre-seed company, but they came with a lot of very experienced healthcare team members. Again, from the provider side primarily. These are folks that had run value-based care programs for major hospitals, and really had, when I think about the strengths of this group, they really had that ability to sort of see where the market was going from a regulatory side, and also pair that with a successful commercial model. So whenever I see that in an entrepreneur, that ability to understand, how to utilize, things like TEFCA and some of the new programs that you see here, whether it be the team program or the lead program, they were really clued into, okay, where is this going to take healthcare in the future, and how do we build something around that could take advantage of that? So that's kind of rare to see. They talked about specialty care, representing a large percentage of patient spend, and then they originally, wanted to focus in particularly around surgical outcomes and really look at, again, how could TEFCA help them and really being able to track patients. Ashley touched on before things like transitions of care. In this case, what they were really trying to do is they said, look, we know the best practices. We know how to take care of these patients with certain types of surgical outcomes and issues. And so we know the best practice, but gosh, we don't get people to follow those care plans very often. And so how can we improve, and it ultimately ends up being a value-based care play, but how can we improve the outcomes for these patients, drive costs down, sort of, the much fabled triple aim, and be able to provide better care, right? So that's really what we were trying to accomplish with this group. And we can go ahead and Carol, I think, flip to the next slide here, just a little more setup, and then I'm going to let Josh kind of jump into the demo here. But this was, we've worked with a lot of companies that do some form of virtual care or patient navigation. And so one of the use cases for this particular group is to have a patient-facing app that would be used by the patients themselves as they're getting ready for their surgery, and then post-surgery to make sure that they're doing all the things that the care plan has prescribed. And so it would be useful not only for the patient, but for their caregivers. And so being able to kind of understand that journey. And again, if they're providing, one of the surgeries that's on the list, and then they're trying to keep track of that patient and make sure they're doing all the things they need to have a successful outcome. Well, what happens all of a sudden if they go out of network and they go to a different provider, they check into the emergency room, they felt like TEFCA and being plugged in would have given them the ability to understand that patient's journey, regardless of sort of the network that they're in within certain markets. And so Josh and team, Josh was a part of our team and really kind of scoping out this initiative and understanding the architecture and how we were going to put these pieces together. This is not an unambitious group, and it's not a play that is sort of easily done. And so, to Ashley's point before, one of the early decisions was, do we want to try and get this data direct, or do we want to use a third-party data aggregator of some sort? And in this case, we had worked with a couple of very well-informed colleagues that came from both the payer and provider side, and they said, you're really better off going to be going with one of these third-party data aggregators. And so I'll probably, this is just a setup to kind of, give you an idea of, I think for me, the fact that commercial groups are coming to us and saying, hey, how can I utilize TEFCA data to inform our process, to make our value-based care model better, and to really affect patient outcomes? That's kind of where we want to be, right, as a community and as a group. And so I'll let Josh kind of take it away and tell you a little bit more about the actual solution, show you a little bit of that, and maybe talk about, Josh, if you want to pick up on why did that third-party data aggregator make sense to you from the technical side? Because I think some people might be curious about, how did we choose that and why?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. So to start with, I'll kind of go through at a high level what the journey looks like for a patient in this application, and then try to kind of show that in demo form.
Yeah.
So a patient will come to a provider, and to start with, the provider today often doesn't have good data. It's the clipboard problem. And so the journey starts by asking the TEFCA network through this third-party data aggregator for data on the patient so that the provider can give the best care possible with as much context as possible, that 3-year history. But the value-based care part that Andrew is referring to is the next step, which is we don't just query the network for an initial data seed. We subscribe to the patient through this third-party provider, and they monitor the TEFCA network for signals that the patient has transitioned from one place to another, and so on. And so what the patient journey looks like now, whereas before you might get a care plan say you should do these things. Go forth and be productive in your recovery. The provider can now, near real time, monitor that the patient is following that care plan that they designed, and then if they miss a check-in or anything along those lines, can take proactive action to validate that, oh, we'll reschedule that for you, because like Andrew was saying, we have a lot of data on what a successful care journey looks like. And so keeping patients on the straight and narrow is very important. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and kind of go through at a high level what that might look like. I'll call out that this is a sandbox environment. I'm not going to show you real patient data. And also I had to tear a decent bit out for this journey. But so, you get the referral from whomever, and you have this basic information about the patient. And we can make a query. This is through Particle Health, one of the third-party data aggregators that Ashley showed on her slide earlier. And we're just going to make a query off to the TEFCA network with that minimal data set. And in a few seconds, what we should see is a rather robust data set the provider can use to make informed decisions about what the best care plan would be for that patient before they even see the patient, and then after they see the patient, make even better decisions. So they're not walking in blind. They have a robust data set to go off of. So we have, the documentation of when these conditions were first reported, what medications they're currently taking, what allergies they have, because that's highly important and that kind of stuff, and even a history of their labs. Like I said, test data. So you're going to see some silliness in here. Um, Previous procedures, and then that all important encounters history. And so this encounters history here can be tracked in real time. And so I'm going to simulate that the patient is going somewhere else, going to have an encounter somewhere else and be admitted to a hospital or wherever. And so what we can see is now we have that patient admission. And as part of that, like I said, this is a test data set, so we don't have as much robust data. But the data set that we would receive in this case has a facility name attached to it. What facility were they going to? And that serves two purposes. One is, well, we expected them to be um, at we expected them to be at this facility to follow up on their surgery. But instead they went to this facility. Well, now we can check in with the patient and ask, why are we going somewhere else? And if it's a legitimate reason, then that's fantastic. And we can keep track of that and be informed on what their care journey looks like. But the other side of that is if it's where they're supposed to go, then the provider here is giving the patient an app that they can automatically check off that they did in fact make it to their follow-up appointment. And so everybody is fully engaged and fully aware. And like Andrew alluded to, it's not just the patient that needs to know this stuff sometimes, especially for elderly folks. We might have a son or daughter that also is very invested in ensuring that the patient is following the care journey. And so we can surface that data with the patient's consent to a whole care team. And now it's a collaborative effort across all of these different patients, or sorry, all these different stakeholders. Sorry. And so what that looks like at a very technical level is that initial subscription is just an API call with a minimal data set. And then that allows us to tell Particle Health in this case, I want to know anytime that there's an update. And we just tell Particle Health, anytime there's an update, just hit this webhook. And that webhook allows us to, in real time, keep all of those disparate people in the know through WebSocket connections, if applicable. The other side of this is that because this data is in near real time, patients are expected to have a whole care team that can follow up immediately if they do fall off that straight and narrow. So that's the really exciting part about TEFCA to me, is that this now becomes a system where we're not just scrounging around for data. We can meaningfully get data from day one and keep that data up to date across multiple systems that normally wouldn't have talked to each other.
That's great. Josh, thank you for that. Andrew, I saw you came off of mute. Did you have something to elaborate on there?
Well, no, I was just going to ask Josh to kind of, again, this was an early stage group that came to us last fall, kind of maybe just give them an update on sort of where that initiative is and when it'll be rolling out and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so the team is tracking along. This particle integration was actually only finished last week, and it's as you can see, it's working. All of that was hitting the particle system. They're also integrating with several third-party providers, but we do expect that they'll be able to meaningfully go live before the end of the summer, and have that robust data set from day one for all of their patients, which is, I mean, that's kind of unimaginable from 4 years ago, that that you could expect to have this kind of data. The reason that we did go with this instead of subscribing directly to HL7 messages and all that is a convenience factor. As Andrew alluded to, they're very aggressive in their timelines, and we're meeting them there. But that does mean that a third-party data aggregator, which Ashley alluded to for startups is often the right decision, and we made the determination that it was the right decision here, rather than for one thing, particle health, this is what they do professionally. This is not what our client does professionally. They don't really care about trying to deduplicate these records or trying to subscribe to as many signals as possible. It's a lot easier to let somebody specialize in the thing and be good at it than it is to try to spread your resources. So they specialize in helping patients find the correct care, and this just empowers them to do that.
That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah. I just want to give everybody a sense, because one of the other things that we're seeing right now with a lot of clients in healthcare is, because of the way AI is accelerating coding development processes in general, they want to know, how can we incorporate these kind of things, and what's the time frame going to look like? And things that used to take 6, 8, 10 months are now falling into 6, 4, and 2 months increments, right? And so the ability to kind of get one of these solutions up and running, particularly if you use a third party, is really pretty exciting in a lot of cases. So, yeah.
It is.
Hmm.
Okay, well, I'm going to bring our slide back up and we will roll into questions and answers. So if anyone has any questions that you would like to ask, please do feel free to drop them in the chat or come off of mute, whatever you're most comfortable with. And in the meantime, maybe Ashley, you could tell us, for organizations that are just beginning to understand TEFCA and they see a need there, where do they start? Should they begin with the tech and look at these data aggregators, or focusing more on legal and governance requirements, or identifying, you gave some use cases, identifying those use cases?
Oh, sorry, I'm on mute. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yes, all of them, right? I think for a lot of them is really defining the use case very clearly, because some of the clients we've worked with would be excited about, TEFCA and kind of try to pilot something, but haven't really clearly defined what they want to get out of it. Is it do you want to have some qualitative improvement to the care experience? Do you want to change the quality measures that you're being measured against and reduce the gaps in care? What are those exact specific outcomes that are going to have some ROI before you go and invest in, some technical infrastructure and so forth. So really, getting clear on that. But then I think the next step then is yeah, to figure out, do you have the governance in place? Are you, does this fit an exchange purpose? Are you going to be able to manage this new addition? And then yeah, you start the technical, right, with a partner or internal technical team to figure out what's the right approach, kind of what the blueprint is for actual implementation, and how do you get from A to Z, pilot and then kind of go through the implementation cycle. Mhm.
Excellent. Anything to add there, Andrew? Are there other things they should be thinking about before they begin the journey, now that you've been through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it always comes down to use cases, right? And it's just, and again, sort of framing out where do you want to be, and sort of what's the vision for that. And then again, just this to me is a I'll call it a benefit or a utility, a tool that is there that can, enhance a lot of these, whether they're value-based care, which we do a fair amount of, or any kind of virtual care delivery models where you're trying to understand a patient journey. And that aren't we all to some degree if
Right.
you're providing some type of care, right? So again, just thinking about those use cases. And then again, a lot of this stuff, it seems intimidating, and what I've learned is that if I have questions about TEFCA, I'm going to Ashley, right? So I think part of your HHS community, right? I think, being able to sort of share knowledge and say, hey, this seems intimidating if I'm just coming at it and I don't know what TEFCA stands for, but it is pretty accessible, particularly when you tap into the expertise that you've got here. And again, even the publicly available stuff, if you don't love reading, have Claude read it for you and give the
Right.
summary, and then ask questions of your peers, that kind of thing. So.
Definitely. Yeah. You don't have to forge the journey alone, it sounds like.
No.
Since we have a little time, I'm going to ask you to look into, the future, and where do you think TEFCA will have the greatest impact in the next 12 to 24 months.
I hate to go DC on this, but I did work up there for a while, and the fact that politicians seem to be paying attention to this and putting teeth behind it is actually very different than maybe where we started 10 years ago. I feel like all this voluntary opt-in stuff and trying to put incentives out there and all that is, has only been very marginally successful. So I'm actually glad that some of these things that those of us that work in this community have been talking about for a long time, may come to fruition if the government somewhat stays interested in this and tries to drive some of these good practices. So I just hope that continues. It always is interesting. Administration to administration, obviously a lot of things can change, but this is, I would hope it's an area that's sort of relatively uncontroversial and that we as a community can kind of get behind and hopefully continue to drive this forward. So that would be, I guess, my hope for the future more than I think what's going to happen necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Ashley?
Yeah, I think this administration is very focused on Medicare. There are these new initiatives where there's like a Medicare app library, and these apps are getting data from TEFCA and they're sort of proving this thesis out, and they're very focused on that. So I think some of Medicare participants might start to see the impact of that, where they're able to log in using the same login they use for Medicare, and their records are there because they've kind of piloted it within this app ecosystem. So some of that's starting to take effect. And then I think in the timeline you mentioned, I don't think we're going to see data flowing as much as we want it to across all of our EHRs and apps and things. But the APIs I think are going to start to be more functional, right? They're really paying attention to like, can I go and does the transaction work? And so that means app developers and health tech ecosystem participants are going to actually be able to start meaningfully build on top of that. And then as when we as patients or when our family members as patients will start to kind of like, I think, see the positive effects of that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's great. I don't see any questions coming in, but if our audience does have additional questions, I'm going to put a slide up here, and you can, in a minute, and you can reach out to us. In terms of next steps, we will be sending out the recording and the slides from this session, and you'll also get a survey. So we would love to hear your thoughts on the survey. If you found this meaningful, are there other things you want to hear from us? How can we bring valuable content to all of you, which is what we want to do at HHS Connect. So thank you to all of you who've joined us and participated today. I really want to send a special thank you to our speakers, Ashley, Andrew, and Josh. Keywell and FortyAU are doing some really amazing things, and we are so honored to have them in the HHS Connect Partner Network. But thank you for bringing your practical and thoughtful perspective to a topic that can be very technical or abstract. And I think, we brought some very practical things today, which is really important. But today's conversation really should remind us that interoperability is not about just moving data from one place to another. There is a lot of value, business value, outcomes value in interoperability. And when we are able to make that information available in ways that support better care, better decisions, and better operations, ultimately we're going to have better outcomes for the people in our communities. So we want to take care of health and human services folks too. We work with them every day and they do amazing work. So thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you again in a future HHS Connect webinar.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.